Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about HTTP methods, what a REST API is, how can we create requests from Postman, how will we handle those requests using our Golang backend server, which we're going to be leveraging a package called Mux to create the routing, and also talk a little bit about JSON and some of the common HTTP methods that are used in the industry today. So by the end of the video, you'll be able to see and appreciate how we can create a Golang CRUD Mux application. So let's dive right in. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and basically representational state transfer is a standard and it comes with certain features that make it really popular. And one of the features is that our REST APIs are usually stateless, and that means that our requests to the backend usually contain, I don't want to say usually, they should always contain all the info necessary for the backend to respond. And so the next thing is that it's flexible. So what I mean by flexible is that it's really easy for us to do integration, especially when we are using like HTTP methods and we're using JSON. And we'll see an example of what JSON is, but JSON is basically stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's a special type of data format that we're going to be working with. And one of the last features I want to mention is that it's really good because we can implement something called caching. And caching basically just means that we're going to store some data on the backend so the client doesn't need to send, I'm going to say, redundant information. You'll probably hear the word API a lot, and I just want to define what an API is. An API is Application Programming Interface, and it's just a standard or like a bunch of protocols that allow two systems to communicate. And so as long as we're using a standard like a RESTful API standard, it's going to become easier for us to do integration and basically be able to connect to other systems. But a RESTful API, as an example, we have a link here. Let's say http:// and we're going to say localhost, and we're serving up data on a specific port. Now I'm going to put a slash here. So let's say if you were to hit this API, you were to see welcome to cars, okay? And if you were to hit the same link, but if you were to say in here Toyota, for example, you would only see all the Toyota cars, list of Toyota cars. And if you were to add even more information to this URL, like Corolla, maybe you would see details about a Corolla. So my point is basically we're going to have these like URLs that we're going to call from our front end, and these API calls will in turn give us back some data. And there are a couple of protocols that are in the HTTP world, and in our example we're going to build something called a CRUD app. And so a CRUD application is basically an application that allows us to create, and it allows us to read stuff, and read, and it allows us to update, and it allows us to delete. So these all map to certain protocols in the HTTP language. And what these look like is when we're doing a create, we're actually doing something called a post. So we're posting something we're going to send some object to our backend, and we're going to do a post, and that's the name of the method. And when we do our example, it's going to become a lot more clear. But basically, then there's something called a read, and a read is a GET request. So these are examples of GET requests. So this is a GET request, this is a GET request, because we're not creating anything new. So we're going to get some data back. Update translates to this thing called a put method, and a delete call is a delete method. So nobody strained any brain muscles coming up with this HTTP name. But yeah, basically this is what a CRUD app is. It's an application that we're going to build where we do simple create, read, update, and deletes of objects. So let's take a look at what a request kind of looks like. A request from the front end will basically have something in it, sometimes called a header. And a header is like a part of the request that has some additional information. A lot of times it contains something called a token, which is used for authentication. It's going to usually contain the operation or method. So like it's going to say, is this a get or a put or a delete or a post? And another part of the request is obviously our endpoint. And by endpoint, I mean this URL. And then it's going to contain sometimes a body. So a body is basically some JSON that we will send as a request to create something, let's say. Now, these are the things that make up a request. So we're going to take a look at what a request kind of looks like in this thing called Postman. And then obviously we also have a response, right? So again, a response can also contain a header, and the header a lot of times can contain something like content type. And the content type is usually application JSON. And that header is just there so that the front end app can figure out what data was returned and know how to handle it. And then obviously we can send back some like sort of body as well, right? So this body, for example, could be another JSON body, like we mentioned a little earlier, that we want to get back. So maybe like a list of Toyotas or something. So now really quickly, I'm just going to talk about this tool called Postman that we're going to use. And Postman helps us sort of simulate what our front end is going to do and like ask for from our back end. As an example here, I have Postman open. You can see I've made a bunch of gets and posts before by these different tabs. But basically we have our URL here, localhost 8081, like we were talking about in our earlier example. And then right here, when I click here, you can see all these different methods that we can apply. And here's our post, put, delete, and then obviously our get. So we're gonna send some sort of request, so we can send a request. And obviously remember we were saying that in our request we could have a body. So in here we're gonna see how we can basically put some JSON in here. And now I'm gonna quickly just talk about what sort of JSON looks like. And here's a quick example of what JSON looks like. So here we have a JSON object, which we can tell by the fact that it's wrapped in this curly bracket, and then we have a string here called cars, and then cars are basically an array of cars that have a make and model. And in this example, right, we see Toyota Corolla, Honda Accord, Ferrari, Spider. This is an example of a JSON object, and we're going to use JSON in our web application to send and receive data. So if you remember from our last video, we used the net HTTP package to create a backend Golang web server. And in today's example, we're going to use a package called Golang Mux. And here's its website, github.com/gorilla/mux. And basically this package will help us create a request router, and we're going to be able to handle specific type of requests. And so here's an example of what it looks like to utilize the Golang Mux library, and then here's an example of a function that's implementing how they're using Mux. We can see it's very similar to our previous example with a handle func and then the name of the function that's going to handle it. So without further ado, let's create our first Golang Mux REST API CRUD application. Boy, that was a mouthful, huh? So to kick this off, I'm going to create a directory here called CRUD Mux. I'm going to cd into our CRUD Mux directory, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a go mod init and initialize our module by saying usama.com/CRUD Mux, like so. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to install our Gorilla Mux package or library that we need so that we can do our routing. So to do that, I'm just gonna paste in the line here, go get-u github.com/gorilla/mux. So it says added GitHub Gorilla Mux. Now what I'm gonna do is just create our main.go file, and I'm gonna open all this up in Visual Studio Code. Okay, cool. So now that we're here in our Visual Studio Code, what I want to do is go into our main.go file, and what I'm going to do here is say package main func main. Real simple, right? So I'm going to open up my terminal as well, and the first thing I want to do is I actually want to create the Gorilla Mux router, and obviously at the top I'm going to need to import that github/gorilla/mux thing, but you'll see that it'll hopefully automatically import it because we've installed it. One more thing to point out is this go.mod right here. As you can see, it says require github/gorilla/mux, right? And this go.sum has some stuff that we'll talk about later, but basically go.sum file lists down the checksum of direct and indirect dependencies required. We're probably not going to edit or modify this file in any way, so we're just going to ignore it for now a little bit, but this go.mod is basically the important piece. So heading over to this main.go file, what I'm going to do is create a router. So I'm going to call this router, like that. I'm going to say router is equal to mux.new router, and as you can see, it already imported it, so that's pretty awesome. And then I'm just going to say new router dot, and I'm going to actually mention this thing called strict slash, and I'm going to set it to true. So strict slash is basically when we're making our API calls, we're trying to be strict about the slashes. So if there's a trailing slash at the end of our API call, like if somebody said like localhost colon 8081 slash cars slash, that's not the same as saying the same thing as like this, right? So we're basically we're strict about this trailing slash here. The next thing I'm going to do is create a couple of routes that I think will make a lot of sense as we develop them, but first router is going, so the first thing is going to be this router.handle func, and I'm going to handle this slash cars route, and this is going to fire a function called return all cars, and the method that's used for this is going to be the get method. So let's say that this is our main route for now. All I want to wrap this up with is by saying http.listen and serve, and I'm going to serve it up on port 8081, and I'm going to mention the router that is going to run on that port, so that's this router. Return all cars is a function we haven't declared yet, so it's kind of bugging out, but we are going to create that. So the first thing I want to do is create a struct. I'm going to call the struct vehicle struct, and a vehicle is basically something that has an ID, which is an integer, a make, which is a string, a model, which is a string as well, and then a price, which is an integer. And then the next thing I'm going to do is actually create an array of vehicles that is going to be our initial vehicle array when our program starts up. So I'm going to say var vehicles is equal to an array of type vehicle, and I'll put these curly brackets, and I'm going to fill it up with objects. So the first is going to be 1, Toyota, Corolla, and then a price. So I'm going to say 10,000. Let's add in a couple more cars. I'm going to add in the car with an ID of 2 and a car with an ID of 3. I'm going to say Toyota Camry, and it has a price of 20,000, and then a Honda Civic, and it has a price of 15,000, let's say. Now I'm going to create this function for return all cars so that we can send back our list of vehicles to the front end. So to do that, I'm going to say func name our function func return all cars. And in this function, I need to actually pass in something called the response writer. This is something that will write the response so we can send it back to the front end. And I also want to pass in a pointer to the request that we get. And now what I'm going to do is I want to send back some information by sending a header. So we were talking about that a little earlier, but there's this thing called a header which will have some additional information about our request or our response. And in this example, we're going to send back a response of saying that we have a OK. And what I mean by that is everything went kind of like as planned, and it's a status of 200. And the other thing I want to send back is a JSON.new encoder. And I'm going to encode into our response writer here the vehicles. So when I save this, we can see at the top we're using the encoding JSON package net_http github.com. One thing I want to add really quickly is a log.fatal here. Just in case if things go wrong, it'll actually quit out of this application. Alright, cool. So now we're in good shape. Now we have basically a localhost :8081/cars API, which if we do a GET request for, we will get back a list of vehicles and a header saying that everything went well with a 200 status code. Let's go ahead and run our project by saying go run usama.com/crudmux. CRUD-mux like that. Alright, cool. So our application, our backend web server is now running. And if we go to localhost :8081/cars, we should get back a list of cars. So this is my Postman application here. As you can see, I'm making a GET request from our list of options. Yours might look a little bit different in your overall application because obviously you might not have made previous requests before, but I'm making a new one here. I'm saying GET. I'm going to say localhost :8081/cars like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a request, and there we go. We have a response here where we can see an array containing our ID1 Toyota Corolla, our Toyota Camry, and our Honda Civic. And another thing we can do here is, we can actually, instead of seeing this in text, we're going to see this in JSON. And now we can see a slightly better view of the response we got back. So we have, this was our list of vehicles, and this is how we're making a request to our backend from a front end. So the Postman will be simulating a front end throughout this project. Alright, so heading back to our code here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of more routes, and we're going to create their functions and have an entire CRUD application ready to go. So the next function I'm going to create, I'm going to make a couple copies here of this initial one just because the format will be helpful. So now what I want to have is I want to have a function that says /car/make/make like this. And this will return all cars, but return them by brand. So let's say return cars by brand like this. And the method is still going to be a get. So we're still getting a list of cars, but this time let's say that we just return the list of Toyotas. So we shouldn't see this Honda, right? Hypothetically. The next route I'm going to make is /cars/ID. And this will return a specific car by ID. So let's call this function return car by ID. And also this is a get function. Let's make another one here, which will update a car. So this one will also require an ID, slash like this, like ID. And it's going to be a put request. So put is for updating, and let's say that we want to create a new car. So to do that, I'm just going to say /cars, and I'm going to say post, and this hold on, so for the put, right, let's say that it's called remove or update car, sorry. And then for the post to create a new car, we're gonna say create car, and it's gonna be a post, and we're missing a delete, so I'm gonna add one more here for a delete. And what this is gonna do is just remove a car, like by some index, right? So, /id. So this is the list of all of our routes. We have one route which will return cars by their brand. We'll have one that returns one car by its ID. We'll have one that updates a car by ID. We have one that will create a car, a new car, and we have one that will remove a car by its index. So actually, maybe calling it index is a little weird. I'm just gonna call it ID. Okay, now let's make all of the functions so that this thing stops complaining. So similar to the return all cars, I'm gonna say the name of all of our functions. So we have a function called return all cars. We need a function called return cars by brand. We need a function called return car by ID. We need a function called update car. We need a function called create car. And we need one more function here called remove car by ID. This will delete a specific car. Okay, cool. And we will remove these encoded JSON things here from all these. Alright, cool. So now when I save this, it's no longer complaining. This is all of the functions that will fire. If we were to hit all of these endpoints, we would get back basically just the status okay. One thing to keep note is that we're going to need to stop our CRUD Mux from running and then rerun it every time we make a change. So let's run our code now. And let's head over to Postman, create a new request. I'm going to say localhost /8081/car/car/Toyota. Oops, sorry, /car/make Toyota. Now you can see right here that we have a /car/make/make. So the first /car/make is the API route, and this last part is whatever we pass in for the value for what car we basically want back by make. It's gonna take it in. So I'm saying Toyota here, and I'm hitting this request, and you can see I'm getting back a 200 OK, but I'm not getting back any response, right? Because return cars by brand is a function we haven't actually filled out the details of. So let's go ahead and create this function first. And to do that, I'm going to need to use that make variable. And to do that, I'm going to say vars mux.vars, and let's set this equal to vars. So I'm going to say vars is a variable equal to the mux.vars, and I'm passing in the request. So this is the request we're getting from the front end, and I'm going to say car let's say for car make is equal to our vars variable where the key is make. And then what I want to do is actually, I'm just going to print out vars. I'm going to print out the car M. So for now, all that's going to happen is we're not going to send back any response besides just the 200, but I want to show you guys what the variables we're getting from this mux.vars are and what the make is that we're getting from the front end. So we're sending it /Toyota. So I'm gonna save my code, stop my application, rerun it like so. And now I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna send a request. Still getting a 200 OK when I send the request. But now we can see from our print statement that we have a map, right? So this is actually, this vars variable, this mux.vars is a map of key value pairs, and the car m, which is the value for this map's make key, is going to be Toyota. So we're printing out those two values right now. Instead of just printing out those two values, what we want to do is check across the array of vehicles we have and send back a response that contains the list of all the vehicles that have that brand as their make. So now what I'm going to do is remove this statement and actually send back a response. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a variable called cars and set it equal to of type vehicle. It's going to be empty in the beginning, and then for underscore comma car colon equal range of vehicles. So we're iterating over the list of vehicles we have up here. If the car dot make is equal to the car m that was passed in, I want to set cars equal to the append of cars and pass in the car that we are on. So what's going to happen right now is inside of this if statement, we're going to be scoped. Basically, this cars will be a local copy kind of. So what I actually want to do is I'm going to turn this into a list of vehicles, and it's going to be the memory addresses. And I'm going to take in a pointer, use the pointer to cars, and append to that this car value. So I'm reaching through the memory address of vehicles to capture the value, and I'm going to append to those list of values the new car value. And right here I'm going to say JSON dot new encoder, and I'm going to encode our right with the encode for the list of cars we generated, right? So like we were basically looping through our list of vehicles, and if the car.make matches what we asked for, we want to append to this array here called cars, and we're going to send back that list of cars. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to stop our application from running. I'm going to rerun it, and I'm going to now send a request, and let's send it. And cool, so we got status 200 OK, and we got back a list here. Let's see it in JSON form. We can see we only got back our Toyotas, so that's pretty cool. We basically said we want car/make/Toyota, and since we gave this specific Toyota, our mux.vars key map here, we pulled out the make. We said that if that make is relevant to us, we're going to fill up this cars array, and we're going to send back in a JSON object these cars. Now let's write the code for our return car by ID, but I just want to change something about the return cars by brand function. I'm just going to move this header to write back the status is OK to be done after our code for ranging through the vehicles is done. So I'm going to save that. Now for the return car by ID, we're going to do something similar to this one. So I'm going to copy some code over. We still need the variables. And this time, obviously, we're not going to be working with the make, we'll be working with an ID. I'm going to call this car ID. So why did I put ID here? That's because right here in the get function for return car by ID, we have a slash a curly bracket ID curly bracket instead of the slash curly bracket make curly bracket, right? So over here we were getting cars by their make or brand, and this time we're getting it by their ID. So that's why I'm capturing that value. So now I'm going to add a really simple for loop here to iterate over each of the cars in our range of vehicles. And if the car's specific ID is equal to the car ID that we got from the user, then what I'd like to do is return as a JSON object. So I'm gonna say JSON dot new encoder w dot encode, and then pass in the car. So what I'm seeing over here is basically there's some sort of error letting me know that integers and strings cannot be compared, and that's because the value for the ID being passed in by our API call is going to be a string. So I'm going to actually convert this value essentially into an integer, and I'm going to do that by saying strconv dot a2i, and that just means I'm converting a string to an int. I'm going to wrap this all in some parentheses. It's saying undeclared name, but once I save, it's actually going to show up here at the top in the import section, and it says cannot initialize one variable with two values, and that's actually because the strconvert function for converting strings to integers returns both the integer value but can also return an error. So we can actually go like comma error like that, and we can say if error not equal nil, we can say fmt.println unable to convert to string. Okay, cool. So here we are with our for loop. I'm going to return this encoded car, and one more thing I'm going to do, I'm going to actually remove this and put it in here. And now let's save our code, Control C this, and restart our application. So to get a car by ID, I need to hit the endpoint /car/ID, and hopefully I'll get back a car depending on the ID. So if I say /2, I should get back Toyota Camry. So I'm gonna make a new API call here. I'm gonna say plus, I'm gonna make sure it's a get, I'm gonna say localhost :8081/cars/2. If I send this, look at that, I get back Toyota. Let me visualize this in JSON, and look at that. What if I send it the number 1? If I look at it in JSON, we're getting back ID1's vehicle. Very cool. So now we have most of our get requests done. What's left is the update car method, where we're going to update a car by a specific ID, and then the create car method, which is going to create a car, and remove car by ID. So let's start with create car. In this create car function, what we're going to do is we're going to declare a new variable, and I'm going to call it var new car, and it's of type vehicle. Next thing I'm going to do is json.new decoder. I'm going to decode r.body, which is the body of our request, and I'm going to decode it into the pointer to the new car. Oops. So we're setting the value of new car equal to the body of our request that we got. The next thing I'm going to do is add vehicles. The next thing I'm going to do is set a variable called vehicles equal to the appended vehicles with the new car added to it. And then I'm going to actually send back a status OK, but I'm also going to send back the list of vehicles. So I'm going to come right here, I'm going to say that, and I'm going to send back vehicles. So let's take a look at what happens when I try to do this. Right? So I'm going to save my code, I'm going to stop my application, and I'm going to rerun it. Okay, cool. So for this function, create car, we need to go to the /cars, and we need to basically make sure our method is post, and we need to have a body that includes the ID, make, model, and price. So let's head on over. Let's create a new API call, and I'm going to call, and this is going to be a post, right? Because we're going to be creating something new. And I'm going to say localhost 8081/cars. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into body and I'm going to say raw. As soon as I put these curly brackets, that means it's probably going to be JSON, but just to be sure, I'm going to click this thing right here. I'm going to click JSON like that. Now, when we type, it'll be a little color coded. So in this request, I need to put the ID, the make, the model, and the price. So let's do that. I'm going to set the ID equal to, let's say, 4, because it's going to be the fourth thing in our array. I'm going to set the make equal to, let's say, Ferrari. I'm going to set the model equal to spider. And I'm going to set the price equal to $100,000. Okay, cool. Let's try sending our request to our backend. It says get address E not found. I wonder why. I forgot to put the L here in localhost. Alright, now we can send our request. So here we go. We get back an ID of all of our cars, and look at this fourth one here. Let's take a look at this in JSON. Here's our newly added Ferrari Spider vehicle. Very cool. So now we're able to read data, we're able to create data, and the next thing I'd want to create is the function which will help us delete something from our list of vehicles. So heading back to my code over here, let's work on our function called remove car by ID. In this function, again, I'm going to want to remove a car based on its ID. And to do that, I'm going to need to collect the car's ID from the variables on mux.vars. So here you go. Once again, I'm getting the ID out. I'm converting it to a string. It's going to be car ID. I'm also going to copy over this if statement if for some reason I was unable to convert it to a string. I'm going to save this. And what I'm going to do next is iterate over our vehicles. And I'm going to say if the vehicle's ID is equal to the car ID that we got from our front end, I want to go to use the vehicles array and set it equal to the append function of vehicles up to the key that we're currently on, meaning the current car that we're on. And what I want to do is I want to append the rest of the vehicles array. So I'm going to say colon and I'm going to say k plus 1. So this function will take all of our vehicles up until the key that we're currently on, and it's going to then append to it everything plus 1 after that. So that means that the thing in between these two will be removed and vehicles will be set to this. So all I'd like to do is send back a JSON dot new encoder and send back to our right the encoded new list of vehicles. Let's go ahead and stop our program and restart it. Now I'm going over here into my post section and I'm going to create a new tab. And let's go back to our code for a second, right? So for our /cars/post, if we're creating a new, if we're removing a car, we need to make sure our method is a delete. So over here, I'm going to select delete. And I'm going to go localhost, colon 8081/cars/ and then give the, and then our function takes in a specific ID. So let's say that we were to remove the second thing in our ID, in our list of cars. So the second ID would be this Toyota Camry right here. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and try to remove this car by clicking send. And look at that. So we actually got back our JSON response, and it says here that we just have this now, an ID of 3 and an ID of 1 vehicles. So that removed the ID 2 vehicle. So that's basically our delete function. The last thing that we need to implement is our update car function. So update car also takes in an ID, and we need to basically leverage pretty much the same beginning part as we did for some of these other functions. So in the update car function, I'm going to put this in there. And again, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the value of a certain car by saying, first creating a new instance of that car. So I'm going to say updated car maybe. And I'm going to set it equal to a vehicle. And I'm going to say JSON.new decoder r.body .decode ampersand updated car. So that'll decode our body into this new car. And then for the key comma value colon equal range of our vehicles, if v.id is equal to car ID, then I want vehicles to be equal to the append of vehicles up to k, which is the key we're currently on, and then append everything to the rest of this, k plus 1, like that. Okay, now we removed one, right? So let's just say we want to add to the vehicles the updated car. So usually we're appending one value. If we're appending multiple, that's what these 3 dots are kind of. They're basically saying we have more than just one element we're appending to our list. Now over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually send back the new list of cars. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead, stop our program, and rerun it. So now I'm going to create a put method. And in this put method, I'm going to say localhost colon 8081/cars, and I'm going to give a specific ID. So let's say it's the Toyota Camry. For the Toyota Camry, I'm actually going to replace I'm going to change its value, and I'm going to say, let's go to the raw here, and I'm going to say that I want the ID to remain 2. I want the make to now be, let's say, Mercedes. I want the model to be S-Class, like that. And I want the price, let's put it in quotes here, price, to now be 80,000. So let's send this, and look at that. We get back a JSON where our array now has an ID 1 Toyota Corolla, ID 3 Honda Civic, and an ID 2 Mercedes S-Class. So we were able to update the old value for Toyota Camry, which was ID number 2, to being the Mercedes S-Class. So as you can see, we're doing a create, read, update, and delete. With that, let's go ahead and test out our application from top to bottom. So in Postman here, you can see that we're doing a get and we're getting back Toyota, Honda, and Mercedes. And if we do a get here on the Toyota, we should get back just the Toyota Corolla. And we do. If I hit send, we put that into JSON form,
and then we have our get, and we can get by ID. So we can say get for ID 1, we can get something for ID 3, and this will show us ID 3's value. We can do a post, and if we do a post, we can post basically and create a new car. So let's send this through, and if we see this in JSON, we can see our list of cars here: Toyota, Honda, Mercedes, Ferrari. We were sending this object, this JSON object, in our post request. Let's go ahead and take a look at our delete. We can delete a car by its ID. Let's delete the car we created, which was for ID 4. So I'm going to delete that, and look, this thing will actually send us back a response with the cars left now. So, this is basically a really simple Golang CRUD application. I hope that this video helped you guys feel like making a Golang backend server is something that's very doable, and I hope you guys followed along and felt like I explained things very well. And if there's anything I didn't explain well, please comment in the video. Like and subscribe if this video helped you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.